I'd been planning a solo camping trip for a few weeks. My work had been stressful, and I was feeling burned out, so I thought a few nights in the woods would clear my head. I didn't want a popular campsite with RVs and families and loud kids. I needed real quiet, so I went searching for more isolated areas. I ended up picking a forested region about 4 hours from where I live. It wasn't a designated campground, just a patch of public land tucked near the edge of a national forest, close to the boundaries of a military training zone. There were warning signs posted along certain roads about live fire exercises and restricted zones. But the spot I picked was just outside of that. At least that's what the map said. I left early on a Thursday morning in late September. The weather was perfect, not too hot, not too cold. I had everything I needed packed neatly in the back of my truck. A good tent, a sleeping bag rated for cold nights, plenty of food and water, my portable stove, and some basic tools like a knife, compass, flashlight, and first aid kit. I also brought a paper map of the area just in case. I like to be prepared, especially when I go off the grid. By early afternoon, I reached the forest road that led to the area I'd scouted online. The road was rough and narrow, overgrown in places and not clearly marked, but I took my time and kept checking the map to stay oriented. I passed a few faded signs nailed to trees that said things like, "Military zone begins ahead," or "Restricted access, do not enter." But according to my map, I was still in the clear. I parked in a small clearing off the road, maybe a mile from one of those signs, then hiked deeper into the woods. I wanted to be far enough from the road to avoid any chance of running into people. After about an hour of steady hiking through brush and dense pine, I found a nice flat area near a shallow creek. The spot was quiet, shaded, and clean. No signs of other campers, no trash, no broken branches, just forest. I set up my tent near the tree line with the creek about 30 feet away. After getting everything organized, I made a simple dinner on my stove, sat on a log, and listened to the woods. A few birds called in the distance, and I heard the occasional rustle in the underbrush, probably squirrels or other small animals. It was peaceful, exactly what I'd been craving. As the sky dimmed, I crawled into my tent and dozed off quickly. That first night was uneventful, except for one moment around 2 a.m. when I woke up to a low rumbling sound. It was deep, almost like distant thunder or a far-off explosion. It only lasted a few seconds, then silence again. I laid there in my sleeping bag, waiting, but nothing else followed. I assumed it was a part of some military drill happening miles away, which didn't bother me much. I fell back asleep easily. The next morning, I made coffee and hiked around a bit, just exploring. I didn't see anyone, not a single soul, which I liked. The forest was thick and untouched, with no signs of logging or recent activity. Around midday, I heard another distant boom. This one was sharper, like a single gunshot or small explosion. It echoed through the trees but felt far enough away that I didn't worry. I chalked it up to the nearby military area and reminded myself I was still on legal ground, at least I thought I was. That night, as I was getting ready to sleep, I noticed the woods had gone oddly silent. No wind, no bugs, no night calls from owls or other animals. It wasn't something I noticed right away, but slowly I became aware of how unnaturally still everything felt. I sat for a while outside the tent, watching the trees. The moonlight lit up the clearing, and everything looked normal, but the quiet felt heavy. I stayed out for another half hour, then finally zipped up the tent and went to bed, a little more alert than the night before. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a sound that made me sit straight up. It was a heavy thump nearby, not a branch falling or a squirrel. It was something big, something with weight. I held my breath and listened. A few seconds later, another thump, this one closer. It sounded like someone walking through the woods, carefully but heavily. I grabbed my flashlight and quietly unzipped the corner of the tent, just enough to peek out. I saw nothing, but the sound was there, closer again. I clicked off the flashlight and waited. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to call out or make noise. After a minute or two, the footsteps stopped. Then there was a faint metallic clink, like something brushing against metal. It was so subtle I almost thought I imagined it. I laid down flat, completely still, and waited in the dark. Eventually, the sounds stopped entirely. I stayed awake for hours listening, but nothing else came. By morning, I was jumpy and tired. I walked the area in a wide circle, looking for any signs that someone had come through during the night. I found nothing. No prints, no broken branches, no gear left behind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I considered leaving that day, but I talked myself out of it. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just an animal. I stayed. That afternoon, I noticed something strange while hiking north of the camp. I found an area where the trees were scorched at the base, blackened like from a fire. It wasn't a forest fire though. There was no spread, no burn path, just a circle of heat damage, like something exploded or emitted intense heat in a tight area. The moss was dried out and dead in a perfect ring about 10 feet across. I didn't stay long. I turned back and returned to camp. That evening, I didn't build a fire. I ate cold food and stayed quiet. The stillness returned again, no bugs, no birds, just dead air and that low hum in my ears that you get when everything's completely silent. I felt watched, not paranoid, not nervous. Watched. It was a physical sensation, like someone staring from the shadows. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep much. At some point in the night, I woke up to a new sound, a kind of distant rattling, like chains or metal being dragged. I sat up in the tent and froze. It was coming from the east, beyond the creek. Then I saw a flash of light, brief, dull, like a flashlight being turned on and off. I ducked down and didn't move. There was no more sound after that. When daylight finally came, I packed up. I wasn't going to wait for something worse to happen. I stuffed my gear back into my pack, broke down the tent, and started hiking toward the road where I left my truck. As I moved through the woods, I kept glancing behind me. Several times, I thought I heard movement in the trees, quick, snapping sounds like footsteps trying to stay hidden. I stopped often, trying to listen. It always stopped when I did. About halfway through the hike, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. I passed a tree with a strange marking on it. 3 diagonal cuts, evenly spaced, deep into the bark. They looked intentional. I didn't remember seeing them on the way in. A few minutes later, I saw another tree with the same marks, then another. It felt like a trail marker, but not one I wanted to follow. My pace quickened. When I finally made it back to the clearing where I'd parked my truck, I knew something was wrong. My truck had been moved. It wasn't in the same position I'd left it. It was turned slightly, just enough for me to notice. The driver's side door was ajar, and a faint footprint was pressed into the dirt beside it. Not a boot print, something smooth, almost like the sole of a dress shoe. I checked the inside. Nothing seemed missing, but the glove box was open. My registration papers were gone. I got in, started the engine, and left. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 40 miles away. I checked my phone for signal and finally had a few bars. I called a friend, told them where I'd been, and asked them to meet me back in town. I didn't tell them everything, just that I'd had a rough time and wanted company. That was 2 months ago. Since then, strange things have been happening. A black SUV has parked near my apartment 3 times. Always empty, windows tinted too dark to see inside. I've had 2 calls from unknown numbers where no one says anything, just breathing. My mailbox was left open one morning with a single piece of folded paper inside, blank on both sides. I've tried to report it, but no one takes it seriously. They tell me I'm probably just paranoid or imagining things after spending time alone in the woods. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. Someone was out there with me. Someone who wasn't supposed to be. And I think I got too close to something I shouldn't have seen. I won't go camping alone again. Not near any military zones. Not in any deep forest. Not anywhere I can't see the edge of the tree line. Some places aren't meant to be visited. Some places have eyes that watch and wait. What I found out, there wasn't a ghost or a monster. It was something worse. It was real. It was human. And I think it saw me too. I've been solo camping for over a decade now. I've hiked through remote forests, camped near alpine lakes, and spent nights in places where the only sounds were the wind and my own breathing. I do it because it resets me. The quiet, the solitude, the hard physical effort. It all gives my mind a break from the noise of modern life. I've had a few close calls over the years, sure, but nothing that ever made me seriously reconsider going out again. That changed after my trip to the Ridge Trail in early September of last year. I chose the Ridge Trail for its isolation. It's part of a lesser-known range in the northern part of the state, near a set of foothills that gradually rise into rugged highlands. No cell service for miles, and not a soul in sight once you pass the trailhead. That's exactly what I was looking for. I had 3 days off work, packed my gear the night before, and hit the road before sunrise. The drive was uneventful, just long stretches of winding roads cutting through open country. I pulled off onto a gravel turnout by late morning, parked the truck near the trailhead, and locked everything up. I made sure my emergency beacon was charged and clipped to my hip belt. I always carry one when I'm going somewhere really remote. I double-checked my pack, tent, sleeping bag, freeze-dried meals, water purifier, first aid kit, headlamp, batteries, knife, the usual. The weather was forecast to be clear for the next few days, so I kept my pack fairly light. The trail started off gently enough, winding through a mix of pine and fir. It climbed slowly with the occasional switchback and rocky incline, but nothing too challenging. I took my time, enjoying the smell of the forest and the way the sunlight filtered through the canopy. The trail wasn't marked very well, but I had a topo map and a compass, plus a GPS tracker for backup. I planned to camp about 9 miles in, near a narrow saddle that looked flat enough to pitch a tent. There was a small spring nearby according to the map, and I figured it'd be a good place to refill my water. It took me most of the day to get there. The trail grew steeper and narrower the farther I went, with loose rock underfoot and occasional deadfall to climb over. The last mile was especially rough, skirting the edge of a ridge that dropped off steeply into a valley choked with trees. When I reached the saddle, I could see why nobody really came out here. The ground was uneven, and there wasn't much flat space to work with. I found a small patch of relatively level ground tucked under a few tall pines, just wide enough for my one-person tent. The spring was a few hundred feet downhill, more of a trickle than a stream, but it was clean and cold. I filled up, cooked dinner over my little stove, and settled in just as the sun disappeared behind the ridge. That first night was uneventful. It got cold fast after dark, and I could hear the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Normal forest sounds. I fell asleep quickly, lulled by the silence. The second day, I left most of my gear at the site and went exploring. I followed the ridge trail farther up, hoping to get a view of the valley from the peak. The trail grew thinner and harder to follow, and at some point I lost it entirely. I wasn't worried. I had my GPS tracker and compass, but it was frustrating. The terrain got more rugged, with loose shale and sharp inclines, and the trees thinned out as I climbed. I eventually reached a bluff with a wide view of the valley. It was beautiful, miles of unbroken forest, no roads or houses or signs of civilization. I stayed there for a while, just soaking it in, then started heading back. That's when I noticed the first thing that felt off. It was small at first, just a sound, like rocks shifting on the slope behind me. I froze and turned, expecting to see a deer or maybe a bear in the distance. Nothing, just trees and rock and shadow. I waited a minute, scanned the area, then kept moving. A few minutes later, I heard it again, a faint scraping sound, like something sliding over dry rock. I turned again, still nothing. I told myself it was just the mountain. Loose rocks fall all the time out here, but I picked up my pace anyway. As I made my way back down toward camp, I kept hearing it, sometimes close, sometimes farther away. Always behind me, always just far enough that I couldn't see anything. By the time I got back to camp, I was jumpy and breathing hard. I checked around the site, no tracks, no disturbed branches, nothing out of place. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. High altitude, fatigue, and a bit of solitude can mess with your head. I made dinner, forced myself to relax and went to bed early. That night was different. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound just outside the tent. It wasn't a rustle. It wasn't wind. It was the distinct, unmistakable crunch of a footstep on dry pine needles. I held my breath. Another step, then another. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. My bear spray was in the vestibule. My knife was inside the tent, near my sleeping pad. I didn't dare reach for either. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent, just feet from where I lay. I waited. Nothing. Then, slowly, the steps started again, moving away this time. Fainter, fainter, then gone. I lay awake for the rest of the night. I didn't move. I didn't sleep. I waited for the sun to come up. When it finally did, I unzipped the tent and looked around. There were no footprints. The pine needles were thick, and it was hard to tell if anything had passed through. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, but something had been out there. I was sure of it. I packed up camp in record time. My plan was to hike back to the truck that day instead of staying the third night. It would be a long hike, close to 10 miles, but I was wired with adrenaline and just wanted to be out of there. About 2 miles in, I found something that made my blood run cold. Off to the side of the trail, near a cluster of scrubby trees, was a makeshift camp. Not a hiker's camp, not a hunter's blind. This was something else entirely. There was a blue tarp staked between 2 trees, half collapsed. Beneath it were rusted cans, a torn sleeping bag, and what looked like a plastic milk crate with bones inside, small animal bones, maybe rabbits or birds. But the weirdest part was the notebook. It was lying open on a flat rock. Water damaged, pages warped and stuck together. I flipped through it. Most of it was nonsense. Scribbled words, drawings of eyes, what looked like journal entries written in a cramped, shaky hand. No names, no dates, just sentences like "watch at night" and "they don't come close if you don't move." I left it. I didn't touch anything else. I just backed away and got back on the trail as fast as I could. The rest of the hike was a blur. Every snapped twig or gust of wind made me jump. I kept checking over my shoulder, convinced I was being followed. I didn't stop to eat. I didn't stop to rest. I just pushed through. When I finally reached the trailhead, my truck was exactly where I left it. Nothing disturbed. I threw my pack in the back, locked the doors, and got out of there. I didn't report the camp. I don't know why. Maybe part of me just wanted to forget it. Maybe I didn't want to explain why I was alone in the middle of nowhere. Or maybe I was just scared of what they might find if they went looking. I still go camping, but I don't go that deep anymore. I stick to marked trails. I check in with rangers. I camp near other people even if I don't talk to them. There's something out there. People, not monsters. People who've fallen through the cracks, living off-grid, maybe hiding from something, or maybe just broken in ways I don't want to understand. They don't want to be found, and I don't want to find them. I've learned to listen to my gut. That creeping feeling, the sound of a footstep that doesn't belong. It's real, and it's enough to remind me that the forest, as peaceful as it can seem, has its dark corners. Corners where no one's watching. Corners you're better off leaving alone. That trip was the last time I ever camped alone in a place with no signal, and I'm okay with that. I went camping alone last fall. It wasn't anything special, just something I started doing every year after I turned 30. I didn't have many close friends anymore. Most people my age were married, had kids, or just didn't have time for disappearing into the woods for a weekend. But I loved the quiet. Something about getting away from town, from the noise of cars and crowds, always reset my mind. I picked a spot up in northern Pennsylvania that year. It was a little off the grid, but not so far out that I needed special gear or to hike for miles. I found a small, forgotten trail near an old, unmarked gravel road. No signs, no other people, and nothing but trees and open sky. Perfect. The air had that sharp, earthy smell from the falling leaves, and the cold was just enough to keep the bugs away without being miserable. I parked my truck off to the side of the gravel road, hidden just enough behind a patch of trees so it wouldn't be easily spotted. I double-checked everything in the bed of the truck: tent, food, water, sleeping bag, flashlight, portable stove, everything I'd need for 3 nights. I had my phone on me, but I wasn't expecting a signal. I had a paper map and a compass just in case. I never liked to depend too much on tech when I was out in the woods. The first day went as usual. I hiked maybe half a mile from the road, found a nice flat spot on a hill with a bit of a clearing, and set up camp. The trees were thinning out up there, giving me a pretty wide view of the valley below. Around dusk, I got a fire going, cooked a bit of canned stew, and sat there in my folding chair, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The quiet was perfect. No cars, no distant hum of civilization, just the occasional bird and the crackle of the fire. That night, I lay in my sleeping bag inside the tent, listening to the wind in the trees. I always left the rain fly off if I could. Something about seeing the stars through the mesh helped me sleep. Sometime around midnight, I thought I heard something strange. Not an animal, not wind, something sharper, like metal on stone. It was faint, far off, just enough to make me sit up and listen. But after a few minutes, it was gone. I figured it was my imagination. It wouldn't be the first time my mind played tricks on me in the dark. The next morning, I walked further up the ridge, past some rocky outcrops and thicker brush. That's when I saw it. An old, abandoned quarry. The map hadn't marked it, but it looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Overgrown, with rusted machinery half buried in weeds. There was a small road leading down into it, overgrown and crumbling. I stayed up on the ridge, looking down into the wide, flat pit below. The place looked empty, silent in a weird, hollow way. I stayed for maybe 5 minutes, then walked back to camp. Something about the quarry unsettled me. I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't go back that day. Instead, I cooked a bigger dinner, explored the nearby woods, and tried to shake off the weird feeling that had started creeping in. That night, the sound came back. This time, it was louder. I woke up around 1 a.m. to a sharp clanging echoing through the trees. It wasn't close, but it wasn't as far away as the first night. Came in bursts, metal on stone, then silence, then more scraping. My heart was pounding in my chest. I turned off my headlamp, unzipped the tent quietly, and peered out into the darkness. The moon was out, casting a silver glow over the trees. Nothing moved. The sound stopped as soon as I stepped outside. I didn't sleep well after that. My mind kept running through every possible explanation. Animals messing with old junk, maybe another camper I hadn't noticed, or even someone living out here and hiding. None of it sat right. I thought about packing up and leaving the next morning, but I didn't want to feel like I was running away from nothing. The third day was cold. A gray sky hung overhead, and the wind had picked up. I tried to distract myself by hiking again, heading in a new direction this time, away from the quarry. I found a stream, filtered some water, and even spotted a deer through the trees. For a few hours, things felt normal again. I started thinking maybe I'd just imagined the sounds. Maybe it had been a tree branch scraping against metal or a falling rock. That changed when I got back to my campsite. Something had been there. My firewood pile was scattered. One of the tent stakes had been pulled out, and the side of the tent had collapsed slightly. Nothing was missing, and there were no footprints. Just a quiet mess, like someone had come through and left in a hurry. I stood there, staring at it, trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to panic, but every instinct told me this wasn't normal. Animals don't pull out tent stakes. I rebuilt the tent, gathered the firewood again, and sat there for a long time, trying to decide whether to stay or go. It was already late in the day. Hiking back to the truck would take over an hour, and I wasn't even sure I could find the road again without daylight. I figured I'd stay one more night, then pack up at first light. That was a mistake. That night, the sound came back, closer than before. No more distant echoes. This time, it was right down the hill, maybe a few hundred yards away. Loud, deliberate clanging, like someone hammering metal into stone. My blood felt like ice. I turned off my headlamp, grabbed my hunting knife, not that it would help, and crouched at the edge of the tent flap. The fire was out. The moon was bright, but I couldn't see anything in the direction of the sound. Just trees and shadows. Then it stopped again. Dead silence. I didn't sleep. I sat up all night, heart pounding, knife in my lap, waiting for anything to move. But nothing came. The silence stretched for hours until the first pale light of morning started creeping through the trees. I packed everything fast, stuffed the tent into my bag without folding it, left some gear behind I didn't want to carry. I just wanted to get out. On the way back to the truck, I passed by the top of the quarry again. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped off the trail and walked toward the edge, slowly, heart pounding. Down below, in the wide, flat basin of the quarry, I saw something I hadn't seen before. A tent. Not old, not abandoned. A bright red nylon tent, modern, clean, zipped up tight. Maybe 50 yards from the far edge of the pit. No movement, no smoke, no one around. Just that tent, sitting in the middle of the quarry like it had been there all along. There were drag marks in the gravel, faint lines like something heavy had been pulled across the ground. They led from the woods at the far end of the quarry to the tent. A few old barrels sat nearby. A shovel was half buried in the dirt. I didn't go down. I just stood there for a long time, staring. My mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was another camper. Maybe someone living off the grid. Maybe something worse. I turned around and left. I reached the truck by mid-morning, threw my gear in the back, and drove without stopping until I hit paved roads again. That feeling, that something had been watching me, following me, it didn't fade until hours later. I never reported it. What would I even say? There's a weird tent in an abandoned quarry, and I heard metal noises in the night. No one would care, or they'd think I was imagining things. But I know what I heard. I haven't gone camping alone since then. I still think about it sometimes, about that tent in the quarry, about the sound of metal echoing through the woods. Whoever was down there, whatever they were doing, they weren't looking for company. I was lucky to get out before they noticed I was watching. It started with a solo camping trip I had been planning for months. After a rough stretch at work, I wanted some time away from everything. No people, no noise, no stress. Just me, my pack, and the quiet. I picked a remote area in northern Idaho, near a national forest that wasn't exactly a tourist magnet. It had no cell signal, which I saw as a bonus, and I'd been there once before on a day hike. It was dense with pines, had rocky terrain, and a couple of clearings perfect for setting up camp. I'd gone out there early in the fall, hoping to beat the cold that would hit later in the season. I parked my truck at the end of an old forest road. From there, I hiked in a good 6 miles. The trail wasn't maintained, so it was slow going with my pack, but I liked it that way, less chance of seeing anyone else. I reached the spot I'd picked on the map, a narrow ridge that opened into a flat, slightly elevated clearing with a good view of the trees below. It was surrounded on 3 sides by woods, with only one narrow trail leading in. That was part of why I chose it. One way in, one way out. I set up camp. Small tent, fire pit, food hung up in a bear bag, and gear organized neatly. It was the kind of setup I'd done dozens of times. I wasn't new to this. I knew how to stay safe, how to make sure animals didn't mess with my stuff, how to stay dry and warm if the weather turned. That first night was uneventful. Cold but not freezing, stars clear overhead, the usual rustling of animals in the distance. I didn't even need a fire. I just sat by the edge of the clearing, looking out at the tree line, drinking instant coffee, and listening to the quiet. There's a kind of peace you only get when you're that far from everything. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a short hike away from camp. I followed a game trail that looped around a ridge and dropped into a shallow ravine. I found fresh deer tracks, signs of a rabbit or two, nothing unusual. I wasn't carrying much, just a knife, water, and a GPS. I wasn't going far, just wanted to stretch my legs. When I got back to camp about 2 hours later, something felt different. My tent was fine, nothing was missing. My gear was where I left it, but the fire pit looked disturbed. I hadn't used it yet. I'd cleared a space for it and gathered some wood, but I hadn't built a fire. Now the rocks had shifted. A couple of them were moved outward, and the sticks I'd stacked were broken like someone had stepped on them. There were no obvious tracks, but the dirt looked like it had been messed with. I stood there a long time just looking, trying to decide if maybe a raccoon or a bear had come through. That didn't really make sense, though. The bear bag was untouched. If something wanted food, it would have gone for that first. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, looking for signs, broken branches, claw marks, anything. Nothing. Just the disturbed fire pit. I tried not to let it bother me. Maybe I had stepped on those sticks myself earlier and forgot. Maybe a small animal kicked a rock. I didn't like second-guessing myself, but there was nothing else to go on. I reset the fire pit and cooked lunch just to prove to myself that everything was fine. That night, I made a fire and stayed up later. I sat facing the trail, sipping from a flask and listening. It was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet. It felt off, like the woods were holding their breath. No distant rustles, no occasional owl hoot. Nothing. Just the pop and hiss of the fire. I turned in around midnight. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. The kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face. Something had snapped me out of sleep. A sound, maybe. I lay there, holding my breath, listening. First, nothing. Then I heard a light crack. Not like a branch falling. More like weight, stepping on something dry. Came from the trail. I reached for my knife. I didn't move otherwise. The sound came again, another light crunch. Then silence. I stayed like that for what felt like forever, heart pounding in my throat. Eventually, nothing else happened. No more sounds, no movement. I waited until dawn before I finally unzipped the tent. Everything looked the same. No signs of anything moving through. I checked the trail but didn't see tracks. Just some disturbed dirt, which could have been anything. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had been standing just beyond the clearing, watching. I didn't hike out. I wanted to. My gut told me something wasn't right, but I convinced myself I was overreacting. It was probably an animal, maybe a deer, curious about the smell of the fire. I decided to stay one more night, but I moved my tent closer to the fire pit and gathered more wood, enough to keep the fire going through the night. That day, I didn't go far from camp. I walked in circles around the clearing, expanding out a bit at a time, trying to get a feel for anything unusual. I found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no scat. But the whole time, I had that feeling again, like I was being watched. I tried to ignore it. I cooked dinner early and built the fire up higher than usual. Around sunset, I heard something again. This time, it was definitely footsteps. Not heavy, not crashing through the brush. Controlled, careful, coming from the trail, just beyond the edge of the light. I froze and didn't make a sound. The fire crackled beside me. I stared into the trees, but saw nothing. Then the sound stopped. I waited an hour, barely moving. I didn't call out. I didn't go looking, just waited. Then, as the last light faded from the sky, I heard a new sound. Something brushing against my bear bag. I had hung it high between two trees, maybe 10 feet up. Whatever was out there was messing with it. I stayed low, just watching. Then the sound stopped again. I built the fire up more, made it as bright as I could. I sat up most of the night, knife in hand, staring into the darkness. I thought about using my flashlight, but part of me didn't want to know what I might see. Eventually, just before dawn, I dozed off. When I woke, the fire was out. The bear bag was still there, but the rope was frayed, like someone had sawed at it with a blade. Not enough to cut it down, just enough to weaken it. I checked the trees around the camp. Nothing, but I couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't an animal. Someone was out here, quiet, careful, watching. I packed everything as fast as I could. Didn't eat, didn't rest. I was out of that clearing in 15 minutes, headed straight back to the truck. I kept my knife out and checked behind me constantly. I took a different route out just in case. Halfway back, I spotted something off the trail. A small structure. Just a lean-to made of branches and bark, partially hidden behind a fallen tree. I shouldn't have stopped, but I did. I had to know. I approached slowly. The thing was small, crude, Inside were bones, animal I think, and scraps of cloth, old gear, wrappers, and a rusted tin cup. No sleeping bag, no backpack, nothing modern. But it had been used recently. Dirt was packed down, leaves cleared, and carved into the bark of a tree nearby were marks. Lines, dozens of them, all slashed vertically. No names, no initials, just marks. I backed away and got out of there, fast. When I reached my truck, nothing had been touched. I threw my gear in the back and didn't stop driving until I hit a town with people. I stayed in a motel that night and didn't sleep much. I didn't call the police. I didn't report anything. What would I say? That someone stalked my camp in the woods? That I found an old shack? That was 6 months ago. I haven't been back since. Haven't camped alone. Sometimes I wake up at night and think I hear twigs breaking outside my window. I know it's in my head, probably, but I keep the knife close anyway, because someone was out there, and I don't think I was the first person they watched, and I don't think I'll be the last. I've always liked hiking and camping alone. There's a kind of peace in it that I can't really find anywhere else. No pressure to talk, no plans to follow. Just me, my gear, and the forest. This trip was supposed to be just another quiet weekend in the woods. I planned to hike into a lesser-known area of a state forest I'd been to a couple of times before, somewhere in northern Minnesota. I had looked over some old maps and found a few clearings and forest roads that weren't marked on the newer guides anymore. That's what drew me in. Fewer people meant more quiet, more space, more time to just sit and breathe. I packed light like I always do. One-person tent, food for 3 days, water filter, GPS, compass, map, and my usual pack of gear. I keep things organized almost obsessively. Every pouch has a purpose. I've never liked surprises out there. I had a general plan to hike about 7 miles in on Friday afternoon, camp near an old logging road I'd seen on satellite view, then maybe hike farther off trail on Saturday before heading back Sunday morning. Nothing intense, nothing risky. I'd done more difficult trips. This one was supposed to be easy. I left my car at a small pull-off by the forest boundary, locked it up, and double-checked everything before heading in. It was mid-September. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, sunny skies, no forecast for rain. I was in good spirits, listening to the crunch of my boots on dry pine needles and feeling the usual sense of calm settle in as the trail swallowed me up. Took about 2 hours to reach the spot I had marked. The area was flat, with some large stumps and patches of thick brush. Signs of old logging were still visible, chunks of rusted metal buried in the dirt, moss-covered tire tracks leading nowhere. The road had been reclaimed by the forest long ago. I set up camp a few dozen yards off the old road, behind a dense row of young pine trees. My tent fit perfectly between 2 fallen logs, and the forest floor there was soft with needles. I made a small fire, boiled some water for dinner, and sat back as the sun dipped below the trees. Everything felt right. The air smelled clean. The only sounds were wind in the branches and the occasional bird call. I remember feeling completely content. That night passed without anything strange happening. I slept well, which doesn't always happen the first night out. The next morning I got up early, had some coffee and oatmeal, and packed a smaller day pack with food, water, and basic gear. I planned to explore deeper into the woods, following what looked like an overgrown ATV path I'd seen on the satellite maps. I marked my location on my GPS and brought my compass and map just in case. I left the tent and main gear behind, thinking I'd be back before sunset. The ATV path was hard to follow in some spots. Fallen branches and saplings blocked sections of it, and there were places where the trees had grown so tight together that I had to push my way through. I walked slowly, stopping often to get my bearings. I knew that once I went off the trail, I had to be careful, but I was still confident. I'd done this kind of thing before. I kept my GPS running, marked turns, and checked my compass every few minutes. I wasn't worried. After a couple of hours, I started to feel like I was really deep in it. The woods were thicker, darker. I hadn't seen any clearings for a while. The sun was high, but under the trees, everything looked shadowed. I stopped for lunch near a dry creek bed, sitting on a mossy rock and eating jerky and a granola bar. That's when I first heard the noise. It was faint, maybe just a couple of branches snapping. I figured it was a deer or a squirrel. I've heard plenty of animals out there. It didn't make me nervous at the time. After lunch, I kept going, figuring I'd hike another hour before turning back. But the path started to fade more and more. What had been a rough trail turned into patches of flattened grass. Then nothing. I pulled out the GPS, but the signal was weak. I waited a minute, but it didn't lock in. I checked the map and compass and decided to backtrack instead of risking it. I turned around and tried to follow my own tracks. That's when I realized I was already off from where I thought I was. The trail behind me didn't match what I remembered. I must have veered slightly at some point, maybe followed a game trail by mistake. I didn't panic, but I could feel my heart rate pick up. I turned back the way I thought I'd come, trying to find familiar landmarks, but every tree started to look the same. Every patch of brush, every fallen log. I moved faster, but not too fast. I knew rushing could make it worse. That faint noise started again. Snapping twigs. Not constant, just now and then. I paused and listened hard. It wasn't wind. It wasn't birds. It didn't feel random. It sounded like it was following me, always staying just out of sight. I spun around a couple times, scanned the trees. Nothing. No movement. No animal calls. Just that sense that something was close. I told myself it was just my imagination or maybe an animal curious about me. I pressed on, keeping calm, trying to find the path again. My GPS finally kicked back in but gave a reading that didn't make sense. According to it, I was more than a mile east of where I should have been. That didn't line up with my direction of travel at all. I checked it again. Same result. I double-checked with the compass and map and started to think the GPS might be glitching. Another snapping twig. This time closer. I stopped dead still. Nothing moved. No wind. No birds. Just silence. That kind of heavy, total silence that feels like it's pressing on you. I stood there for a long time. Eventually, I forced myself to keep walking. I just picked a direction and committed to it, checking my compass every few steps. After maybe half an hour, I came across something strange. Clearing, but not a natural one. It was circular, maybe 30 feet across, with the trees around it all looking younger than the rest of the forest. In the middle was a pile of rocks. Not a fire ring, just a mound. The stones were clean, some covered in lichen, stacked maybe 3 feet tall. It looked too neat to be random. I walked around it slowly, trying to figure out what it was. No signs of tools, no burnt wood, no trash. Just the stones. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something about it didn't feel right. I left the clearing quickly and pushed through the trees in the direction I hoped would take me back to camp. I wasn't hungry, but I ate a snack to keep my energy up. I told myself I'd be back at my tent before dark, but the forest kept shifting. The terrain changed subtly, then more dramatically. What had been mostly flat gave way to shallow hills and gullies I didn't remember crossing. My legs started to ache. My water was running low. I checked the GPS again. Now it said I was nearly 3 miles from camp, but I'd only been walking for maybe 90 minutes. That didn't make sense. I finally gave in and climbed one of the larger hills, hoping to spot something from a higher vantage point. From the top, I scanned in every direction. Trees, just endless trees. No trail, no clearing, no smoke from my fire pit. The sun was already getting low. I had maybe an hour of light left. That's when the noise started again. Closer. This time it wasn't just twigs. It was leaves rustling, a definite pattern. Slow, steady steps. I crouched down and stayed completely still. My heart was pounding in my throat. I listened. The steps paused, then moved again. Whatever it was walking in a circle around the hill. Not toward me, just circling. Then silence. When I finally moved again, I went downhill the opposite way. I didn't stop. I just kept going, checking my compass constantly. I don't know how far I walked. The light kept fading, and the forest got darker and thicker. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to camp out here without my gear. But eventually, I had no choice. I found a dry patch under a leaning tree and hunkered down. I wrapped myself in my emergency blanket, ate the last of my food, and drank what little water I had. I didn't sleep. I sat there all night, listening to the woods. Every small sound made me flinch. There were no animals, no wind, just the occasional crunch of something moving in the dark. When morning came, I pushed forward again. This time, I stuck to a single direction, west, checking my compass constantly. I kept going for hours, stopping only to rest and take tiny sips of filtered creek water. Finally, I saw something through the trees, a line of broken stumps, old logging cuts, the same kind I'd seen near my camp. I followed them. My legs burned. My eyes were dry and stinging. I felt like I'd been out there for days. And then, just like that, I saw it. My tent, still standing. My fire ring. My gear, untouched. I collapsed next to it. I didn't even go inside at first. I just laid there, breathing, listening. Everything was quiet again. No footsteps. No snapping twigs. I didn't stay another night. I packed up immediately, refilled my water, and hiked straight back to the car. Took me longer than expected. I kept checking over my shoulder. The trail